Hey y'all, it's me, Danny Baby, in the studio with a very lovely guest. But you already know how we do things. We're going to take a quick second to get into our active listening. We're just going to stim it out for a moment. So any sound you want to make, any movement you want to do, go for it. There, we got it. We got it. So I am in the Denver Community Media studio with the lovely Megan. And I just wanted, first of all, to just check in and see how your spirit is doing today as you introduce yourself.
It's pretty good. I am Megan Lowry. I am I have a long title here at Denver Community Media. It's a lot of jumbled up words that just mean I help people learn how to make their own media here. It's kind of my specialty.
Okay.
And I'm in higher spirits than I was a few days ago. So
I can understand that space. And we just had a beautiful recognition of a holiday pass us, which was Juneteenth. And did you give yourself some space, grace, acknowledgement, and loving
I
to
did.
yourself?
In the past, I would normally have to work a Juneteenth being in the media space, so it's nice to have the day off and kind of do nothing.
Right. Like scheduled to do nothing is like a miracle to do. I just in what you were saying about always having to be like in the space of like recording something or capturing something to relax away from that. Did you have anything that came to mind, I guess would be the question, in a celebration way or a podcast that stuck out to you recognizing Juneteenth or just the brilliance that is?
I don't watch much about like the history or anything of it. I know the history of Juneteenth. I just like to give space for people of color, Black creators, mainly. Support them as much as I can. There's not a specific podcast or specific media that I watch. It's just every time I see someone of color, specifically Black people especially,
Right.
I lift them up, leave a
Yes,
comment,
we do.
leave a like. Yeah.
Get that and elevate their voices, because within you being, within the Denver Community Media, I just combined all those words, just the brilliance that comes out of this space, the different creators, and how you really are like what you inspire me all the time, but sometimes we're unaware of how we inspire others. But just the brilliance that is you, and in the realm that you do work, bringing people's voices to the light or giving them encouragement. Even today, we have a new intern in the building, and he's sitting in here with us, and just watching you guide and uplift a person as they are on this journey. So I guess with all of that being said, and just noting that we're in this fun little season right now, going into summer is like a really interesting space for me always. And there's all these like holidays and notable times leading up to that. In celebrating ourselves. And so what my question would be is how, what would your younger self say to you as the person you are today?
So we talked about this a couple of days ago, and I feel like I have a completely different answer now.
I love that.
So a few days ago, I was in a very kind of protective and closed-in space. I was going through a loss, and also when Juneteenth comes up, I hate the idea that I have to be the token person to educate everyone. And also with Pride as well, and being a part of that community, and feeling like I have to be closeted or hide different identities or different personalities or different parts of my personality. I said the other day that my younger self would be saying, like, blend in. Just like blend into the background, just like don't stand out. That's very much how I was. But I think today it just feels like she would be really proud of how far I've come and who I am and how I represent myself and the people that I surround myself with. You say that I inspire a lot of people, and I love to teach people, and I love to see that journey of them feeling like this is overwhelming. Look at all that, like, look at all these tools. I'm not going to be able to do this. To like, I just produced my 50th episode,
Come on,
and I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So just like I inspire other people, people that come in here inspire me to continue teaching and feeling fulfilled in this, especially you. We have a very similar mission where we want to give voice to those who are ignored, or give voice to those who don't have access to telling their story.
Right.
And I think you're bringing in those people to the space to give them a voice. And that's always been my goal with teaching people how to do this.
Gosh, well,
so I love this podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, because quite honestly, I think that the group that's here provides such a safe existence for people like me to come in. And speaking to all the spaces, like you just said, I'm part of this community, and I'm part of this community, and I'm part of this one. And it's like, I don't want to educate people always. Maybe I just want to sit down and tell my story, and it's up to you to decide if you want to learn from that. And so speaking just, to that space of acknowledgement that, our growing up instances, like what your environment was growing up at that time and how you navigated, in your personality, or knowing that maybe you couldn't have one at a certain time, And so it's almost like the reason my podcast is named Living Vicariously Through Myself is because we spent a majority of our youth living vicariously through someone, people living vicariously through us, and we were just like this reflection of them and their behavior, because if we spoke up, then, there'd be disciplinary action. So, speaking to it also being, Juneteenth is in celebration. And for me, sometimes I always encapsulate June as like a full, to me, it's still like always celebrating, Black folks, because they're just the brilliance. And I always forget that June is also Pride Month. Because I've had a very tough time relating to the queer community. There's a lot of growth to be had there, but there's also a lot of boxes to place myself in order to remain relevant, but also at the same time to not hide who I am, but then also like I don't want to have to over-explain that. So within you being, in the queer community, what have you found as one of the most challenging spaces in how you identify with your queerness?
I think I don't identify with it. I think that's my biggest issue, is that I hid the fact, like my sexuality. I think sexuality is very fluid. It could change. I could have a different one tomorrow, but
yes,
for the longest time, so in my adult life, I've identified myself as a bisexual woman, and I think that there was a lot of shame around that, because anytime I told someone, it was the reactions you'd get are just like sexualizing you. Oh, let's have a threesome, or you've never actually been with a woman, or you're probably one of those girls who just like kisses girls when they're drunk, and you're making like lesbian a thing when you're not actually, and things like that.
Yeah,
I never really identified as it. I've never really explored that side of myself, even just like having more queer friends and feeling like I belong in that community. So it's just kind of something that I don't heavily identify with, and so I don't really feel like I'm a part of the queer community at this point. Maybe that'll change later, but
see, and I love this, because I have felt, and not to take away, like, hey, let's make it about this. I have the same experience with the queer community. I think, ultimately the word queer has been taken back, and there's power in it now, in a really beautiful sense. Like I grew up having to play this game called Smear the Queer on the playground, where they chase somebody and kind of beat them up on the playground. That was a game that they had us playing. And so it always had a very negative connotation. My dad used to say really odd things just based on the generational sayings. He'd just be like, "You're acting so queer," and it was like a negative thing. And to be like who I am now versus like when I first came out, there was only the words lesbian and gay at the time. That was really like, I'm coming from a town of 54 people. I don't know any better. So I am, trying to be like, okay, well, I think I'm a lesbian, but I don't like that terminology because, again, hypersexualized. And then it's like, be in relationships with folks that maybe weren't super comfortable identifying that with that. So we go out in public and we kind of play on the male gaze portion of it, like, oh, we're gay, so guys pay attention to us or something, or so that we can kind of blend in, but not really be seen that this is an actual relationship. So anyway, moving into understanding myself, which I have always been, is more fluid in the binary. Like I don't, I grew up in a cult wearing dresses all the time because that was the identifier. But the older I got, I was just like, I want to wear this. I want to wear this. And I didn't really put a gender to it. And then moving into the space of understanding myself with the word non-binary, I had most instances that it was something that was critiqued or criticized was from the queer community saying that I needed to make a decision, that there's only one or the other. And most of those folks now have transitioned, which is brilliant. I'm not here to yuck your yum, but I totally understand that space. And even to say like queer community, I don't have like a queer community. There's a community of individuals I'm around, but we're all kind of in that same space of like, we can only identify up to our safety, and I am wondering, I guess, with yourself as this, regal human that you are in the aesthetic, obviously you're very beautiful. Does that, when you identify as bi or you share that, do you feel like you were saying sexualized, or does it feel not safe to communicate that in a community?
I feel like it feels more like not accepted or not believed. Okay. Because I do present as a feminine person. So people are just like, that's not true.
Oh, like you're too pretty to be queer.
And it's funny, I've heard like, you're pretty for a black girl growing up. So it's the same kind of like sentiment where it's like, you're not enough for one group or the other.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I had to sit with that for a second. These are real things that people say. So in your experience, trying to grow into the personality or the being that you are, what do you think has affected that most? Is it, being in your stance within your race and your ethnicity, or is it in the queerness, or is it just across the board? Where is that the most difficult space?
Definitely has always been race is the most difficult space for me. Growing up, I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood with kids that didn't look like me, weren't like me. I come from a very like poor family. I came from a family of abuse as well. So I felt like no one related to me. Also, no one looked like me.
Right.
Also, I didn't fit into the trends because I couldn't afford it or I couldn't look like that.
Right.
I would straighten my hair to look like everyone else. I would try to blend in and just be in the background. I never wanted to stand out. I never wanted to be different. It was always about blending in and looking like everyone else, acting like everyone else. And I think that's carried over. I'm just now starting to feel comfortable with how unique and how different I can be. And I think everybody's different. Everybody should embrace that. But that, with race, it's always been an issue because my hometown is a very racist place. Like I said, I heard a lot of "you're pretty for a black girl," and that's because I have white privilege in there because I'm mixed. So being pretty for a black girl just means you don't have the kinky hair, you don't have the darker skin, and those features are beautiful in and of themselves as well.
Absolutely.
You don't have to compare me to another woman and have some like backhanded compliment.
Right.
It just doesn't feel good for anyone.
No, it doesn't. It's so awkward. Like, how do you even take that? Like, thank you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I surmise that you wouldn't want to stand out, like you were just saying, so we kind of, not that we're hiding ourselves, we're just keeping ourselves safe. That was the only way to advocate,
Yeah. And then struggling a little bit in my teenage years with like an attraction to women that I didn't want to think was real, that I thought was wrong, that I had shame around, really added to that idea of like, oh, I'm different and I need to hide all of that.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to hear, like, with you growing up, you say you grew up in a cult. How does that relate? What kind of upbringing did you have in that sense?
Look at you. Okay. I see you. Really, I think the biggest identifiers to me being in a cult we're just not having autonomy over ourselves. And especially those that they view, you know, because there's only male and female, there's only the head of the household and then the subservience. And many times you're not allowed to question anything. So I didn't have autonomy over my own intuition. I grew up knowing that things were wrong and then convinced out of them and groomed in a way that this abuse is normal.
Wow.
And so I'm still, I think, you know, our frontal lobes are so sensitive as we're growing at the age that I was in cult realm, that I still find a struggle with myself sometimes, that I'm like, I've been in therapy for a couple of years and I'm even talked with my therapist about it, that sometimes I will even revert to the word saying sin, like, because I'm so different, I'm sinning, you know? And the autonomy over my thought, my intuition. And so it's taking a lot of therapy and a lot of, you know, conversations with other folks that have either come out of it or their curiosity around it, that they're like, oh my God, that's not the normal I've experienced. And so, and I think we talked about this the other day, was when I guess I sometimes forget that my story is my story, right? Because I have this empathy or this hypervigilance around everybody else's energy, that if somebody tells me like, oh, I got kicked out, I was homeless, and I'm like, oh my God, I could never imagine. I'm like, bitch, that was you. You went through that same shit, you know? Yeah. And I didn't really take that story on, really, quite honestly, until podcasting started about a little over a year and a half ago, and hear my own self tell my story. And then people reflect on the mic with me, just like we're having now. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's such a diversity within our experiences, but we all still come from the same place of curiosity to learn about ourselves. And there's always someone there to like dictate and say, no, that's sin. No, that's this, you know? So, you know, and then identifying within myself, like, okay, my, you know, growing up in a house of trauma as well, I, you know, am Mexican Spanish on my mom's side, but that's where a lot of my trauma originates from, that I'm like, I don't want to dive into that ancestry. That seems horrible, you know? And then, you know, not understanding that I grew up where there was prejudice. I just thought it was warring families. And so my white family just being like the drunks that got to exist the way they existed. And then the poor Mexican family that was the only one in the county, you know, it was like, I didn't recognize how systematic that was, as well as that there was a lot of racism where I grew up. So I'm having to like, just kind of go back in time, like with all these instances. So I guess I wasn't aware that I was allowed to have power, you know? And so just hearing how you're saying things like, oh, you know, you're pretty for this, or, you know, getting sexualized here, and trying to like take our power in that and have some sort of like, you know, not really maybe a box, but like a title to ourselves that doesn't hold shame or have us wince and like want to protect ourselves, because there is a safe space for us to exist. So yeah, I guess that's like a snippet of what it's like for me. But getting to witness you in your excellence is the way that you navigate, you know, people in here, but just how, like, even when I asked you, which you don't know this about me, but I store a lot of information. But when I first asked you, like, would it be okay if I share, or if I got your social media? And just the response that you gave me was like, that's not an important part of me, but I would like for you to have it, you know? And just the way that you delivered that as a way of protecting yourself, I really, really appreciated that. But if there was a way, just like moving into this next portion of like what it's like to want to be a part of something and not be seen, but also you want to be acknowledged for your individual self, and being the representation that you are, even if you're unaware of it, what is kind of something that you're doing or maybe have in practice so that you can honor these spaces a little bit more, even if it's in private, and not, you know, to just be all of social about it?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's boundaries are important. Like you said, like before we started, you said, is there anything that's off limits?
Yep.
You're setting that, we're not going to cross it. The same with, it's Juneteenth, but I'm not going to educate you, and I'm not going to go film something for work. I'm not going to work on this day. I'm going to relax. Just things like that with having boundaries for yourself. Also, you got to let stuff kind of roll off your back a lot more. I've been placed in these boxes based off of a lot of times race. Like if I'm bringing up race or I'm uncomfortable because someone said that, it's like, oh, you have to make everything about race, that kind of thing. Or the angry black woman I get.
Right.
And you kind of just have to be like, well, if you want to think that, there's nothing I can do about that. I'm just going to let that roll off my back. And I think that also goes with like boundaries. Like, what am I going to let affect me?
Right. What you're reacting. What am I really going to react to? What is it going to benefit me to hold this? Because ultimately it doesn't originate with you. But the whole saying that I could never understand that space, just what you said about being an angry black woman. And not to mention just like societally, what has been allowed for that to be the, I guess, like the go-to when somebody's standing up for themselves or a woman is taking the power stance and just being like, no, absolutely not.
I think that happens to a lot of people of color too, because I'm not even a black woman. I don't identify as a black woman. Sometimes I do, only when I'm the only one in the room.
Right.
I'm like representing black people as a whole, I guess, in any instance where I'm the only one. But I'm mixed, and I will never experience the hardships that a black woman goes through every day. Like I said, I do have that side of white privilege because I have a more palatable look. I think that's where a lot of my white privilege comes from.
But your awareness around that, which also allows you to protect other people in the room, which is really profound. But within that too, as being like a representative half the time and almost like, okay, now I have to educate a room and that can be really exhausting. So as for folks that maybe don't understand, even maybe what they're hearing, what is something that if you, like for instance, me having you as a friend and you feeling important and safe with me, what is something that you recommend for me to do so that I could understand you more clearly without you having to educate me?
I think that if it's coming from a place of you wanting to know information and it's coming from a genuine, like, I care about this, will you tell me about it? I think that's totally normal. I've done that with some of my Armenian friends when I didn't understand the conflict going on in Armenia. And I said, hey, I've tried to educate myself. I've gone, Google is free. We talked about this. I've tried to educate myself and I'm still just not understanding the full story. Can you break it down for me? And she happily gave me all these resources and she told me the story in her own words, and then she also gave me organizations that I can donate to or buy a product and support, and I did that. I think that if it's coming from a genuine place and it's genuine love and genuine care from other people, that's all that matters.
Okay. Because that's something that I think I've taken for granted is like the communities I've gotten to exist in while not being part of. I just have a brain that collects a lot of data. So I learn that way, but there are folks that don't know how to apply that. And we live in a very like, Google is free, but there's a lot of censored content or lying out there. And so then people, but just, as friend to friend, it is not your job to educate your friends for one. And it's also a really brilliant space for you to be protected by them if they educate themselves too, and even not only that, we're in Pride Month, and let's just not forget that Pride started as a riot by a very beautiful Black community. And I feel like sometimes Pride becomes, it obviously is a very like the term queer baiting. It's like where companies can be in that consumeristic holiday. They're making money off of selling all these shirts, but they're not sitting down and actually hearing the real stories. And then after it passes, the laws are still going to pass that you can't marry same sex, but these same things, you know, you want us to be celebrated, but you do nothing to protect us.
Right.
And so even in that realm of like educating folks, like Pride is awesome, and we want to stand in solidarity with those that fought for us, but we're fading away from that story so much that we are not embracing in being in the community as to build each other up and educate each other. It's just further dividing us, I feel sometimes, you know. And so, and you were speaking to the space of, you know, what it's like to be bisexual. And unfortunately, media for the longest time has really demonized bisexual folks, and I despise it. I have a sibling who's bisexual, and they immediately get sexualized, or their partner's like, let's have a threesome. It's anything to benefit like the male gaze or something like that, which is so infuriating. Or it's that you've not made up your mind, or you just haven't had the right whatever. And that used to get told to me a lot back in the day when I was more femme presenting. Is a guy would come up to me and partner just like casually sitting somewhere, and they'd be like, well, it's because you haven't met the right man. You know, let me try this on you. And I'm like, have you met the right man? You don't know, you know? And then it's like, you don't know what you're dealing with. Somebody could go into a psychosis and kill you for saying something like that, because that ego space is scary,
right?
You know?
Especially in a man, and they have a lot of homophobia. There's so much internalized homophobia.
Oh my goodness.
Within men.
And they feel inferior if you're like, okay, well, I'm bi, well, I have to be part of it. That's a different definition of things,
right?
You know?
I was told once that that's a red flag. And I said, why is my sexuality a red flag? And he said, well, now I have to worry about both sexes. And I'm like, oh, I'm not a cheater, so why does that matter?
Oh my God,
Why does that matter?
dichotomy.
You don't have to worry about anything.
Wow,
Yeah.
friend.
Yeah.
Okay, so within you understanding yourself and having, you know, an attraction to the female energy, a lot of times within bisexual, what I've heard from some of my bisexual friends is it's more of an affinity to this sharing the same sex. Like you see the nurture and the loving and the compassion. It's not a hypersexualization. So, you know, in order for you to stand in that fullness and state that for yourself, what do you, I guess, where do you feel most safe? In what space do you feel the most safe to just stand in your fullness of being like, I'm bisexual?
I think it's just when I'm around people that love me and care about me and don't judge me. I'm not going to say it's like I feel more safe around like lesbian women or something. Like there's no like label, there's no box that makes me feel safe. It's just the people that I can like crawl out of my shell in front of. You are one of them.
Oh gosh. We're doing
and
it.
just kind of have these like honest conversations about who you really are, what you like, your interests, like your sexuality, just feel comfortable and completely accepted for who you are. And I think that's rare these days.
It really is. And there's still like ulterior motives because, you know, we still have, like you were saying, we have that underlying homophobia, but then we still have this misogynistic way in relationships. So I'm going to get really vulnerable with a story really quickly. I decided recently to be in a fashion show where I was wearing intimate wear. Now, I've never had autonomy over my body like that. I enjoyed it. It was so beautiful. I had a great experience. I can't control every member of that audience and how they were going to respond to me, right? So I could have just like been like, okay, I'm not going to do this based on there may be a man out there that's like, oh my God, you know, the things I would do to that person. And I can't think about that because I felt so empowered in that moment. But from that, I did get invited to be a go-go dancer for an event. Now, I'm not a go-go dancer. I am more of a stimming human, and I just like to move and flow and sway because that allows my anxious energy to get out, and then I feel more grounded. And it's also how I receive information. So they again, seeing an opportunistic time, and I agreed to it in the beginning. I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to have power and autonomy over myself. And then I started seeing like, you know, the function of the event, and it's Women X Pride. So it's spelled WOM and then X, like including non-binary folks. But it's still like, the more I sat with it as I was going through, like you were saying, in this identity of myself, like yesterday I felt like this and I was like, yeah, I'm going to go rock that stage. I'm going to shake my ass. And I was like, today I woke up and I was like, my soul is really sensitive right now. And I don't think that I'd be safe up there, because this event, oddly enough, is on, it was going to be on Friday, which is tomorrow, and is the 5th year anniversary of me no longer drinking alcohol.
Okay.
So alcohol free. And I was kind of thinking to myself, I'm really going to go into this like thirsty little lesbian atmosphere, not have, like, that's the way I want to celebrate myself. And, you know, it was a very vulnerable moment. Like, I'm just going to retract that. Like, yes, I said I'd be there, but this version today, this version doesn't have the capacity to do that. Doesn't have it within my wheelhouse. No matter how beautiful Pride could be celebrated, we're still, as a queer community, we are still perpetuating a space that isn't healthy for me. And I said yes to it, but then I realized quickly that I'm just going to be sexualized there. Nobody's going to care that there's an autistic person up there trying to dive into their sensuality. You know, so I still battle that within myself, that I can get very hypersexualized in certain spaces, and it doesn't feel safe. And I have to, again, after all this religious stuff and everything, to have autonomy over myself is the power of having a choice. And I had a choice, and I knew that it wasn't going to fulfill my spirit, which also let me know that I have my own mind about me, because I was able to change it and be okay with it. You know,
that's really beautiful that you're able to say, you know what, I don't feel safe in this, and I can say no. I can change my mind at any point. I can be someone different today than I was yesterday.
Yeah,
I love that you really like are taking your power back, because that's something that a lot of people struggle with. Like I struggle with just like, I made this commitment, so now I have to do it, and I hate myself for that.
Right. My super extroverted self that's just willing to have the experience. And now my introverted ass is like, you bitch. Yeah. You're making me go out and you already know this isn't something I want to do.
Yeah.
You know, and that for me is like, you know, that divide, that like talking to self, you know, being in that parallel with self, like across the board, what is this going to serve the entirety of my spirit? You know,
I love that.
I can always take something good away from it because I am my own magic, but I can also affect my magic simply by where I place myself. And so it's okay for that, you know, that gut to talk. And I was like, yeah, I can't do this dancing like that. Like, save that for my living room, save that for the street occasionally when I just want to burst out and dance. But to put myself on, you know, on a stage and say, here I am, and you can basically absorb me the way you want to, versus me having control over that.
Yeah.
And so just to speak it within that queer space, as well as like societally, there has not been representation that is positive for a majority of the time for the bisexual community and those that are in that, you know. I think I was even sharing with you, which I don't know if you've seen, but the L Word back in the day, the series that ran, you know, 15 years ago. And even the cover of that series, it's all like salacious and, you know, just has a certain tone to it. They even were really aggressively passive on how they approached the bisexual community on that show. And it caused a lot of lesbians in the community to perpetuate that instance of like, well, you need to make up your mind. It's either a man or a woman, and you can't be gay or you can't be queer unless you only stick to one side, or you're straight. And it was just this whole thing that I think it affected my community, where people would actually vocalize exact scripted lines from that show in order to like defend their take on it. So you all haven't had proper representation, but I'm telling you right now, you're being the best representation that I've ever seen, which is having grace and compassion on yourself, but also protecting yourself in the way of, you know, you can view it the way you want, but it's sacred to me. And so when I decide to speak about it, I'm going to find the safest room to do so, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
It's just brilliant, friend. So with all that, you know, with all of that being said, and having sat in this conversation for this little moment of time that we have, what would you say as this version of yourself right here today? What would you say to your younger version of self that hasn't hit double digits yet?
The biggest thing for me is that you're safe and you're loved. Mm-hmm. I think those were the two things I was lacking.
Right.
Especially self-love. Mm-hmm. But you're safe, you're loved by a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds. And just stop worrying. Stop worrying so much.
Yeah.
Just be you. And the people that love you for you are going to stick around. The people that don't, you don't need them.
Right.
And you don't have to try to convince people to...
That part.
One, you don't have to be palatable, and two, you don't have to convince people to love you. You don't need them to be around you.
Wow.
It's just going to give you bad energy that you don't need anyway.
You don't have to earn it. It's already here. Wow, friend, that's really beautiful. And so within all that you've been doing for the community to, bring awareness to different voices, to different backgrounds, to just the human experience, what would you say is the representation that you are to your younger self, but maybe folks that are similar to you? What is something that you could say that might feel encouraging to that spirit of a young one that needs someone to look to?
I would say if you're feeling like you don't have anyone, you always have yourself. That sounds very lonely, I know that.
No, that's really beautiful.
I talk to myself as my higher self, and I talk to my younger version as myself. There's a lot of inception in my brain.
I love this so much.
But I think that's helped a lot heal. Like I'm parenting my younger self, and then my higher self or my future self is parenting me.
I love that so much.
When I feel lonely, when I feel like I have nobody, I'm like, let me sing a romantic song to myself.
Right.
And it's just my higher self talking to me. And then I feel like so empowered and loved and not alone because I have always been here for myself. I've always gotten through everything. And I can look at my inner child and say, a lot of bad things have happened to you, but I have you in my hands and I'll take care of you. And I think that's helped so much, immensely, heal a lot of what I've gone through.
Mm-hmm. Because, and even like you were saying, like you're parenting yourself. Speaking how we were talking about abusive backgrounds, and then you're like in a way of having the autonomy over your own self, your spirit and everything. And you're like, no, I got you. Mm-hmm. And so it's that parallel of like, okay, this quantum leap back and forth between like people could try to tell me the type of child I was based on their preconceived notion of me, but they had no idea that like I had to talk to my higher or my older self, or I had to talk like I was already out of this position. Mm-hmm. And I think that we make that like a loser thing, like, oh, as I was always by myself as a young person, like hanging out on my own. But like now I see the importance of that because I can be alone with myself and it's not terrifying. It's literally the safest space I can be. Mm-hmm. And you just spoke so eloquently to that. Thank you. Because I needed that too. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah. Shit.
Of course. Yeah. I think sometimes it's really hard to like do that for yourself. Like this present Megan feels depressed and doesn't want to acknowledge all the beauty in her. Mm-hmm. And so you can just put yourself in that older body and be like, come on, look at everything you've done.
Come on, like, young wonder, you got this. You're doing it already.
And I love that you bring up like, you're speaking to yourself as if you've already gotten through this.
Right.
And so that gives you a whole new layer of hope.
It
especially
does.
When you feel alone or you're going through something based off of your circumstances or your sexuality or your skin color.
Yeah.
You always have yourself, which sounds weird, but it works.
I just wish people would have said this to me back in the day versus like, oh, don't be lonely if you're that weird kid in the corner. You're the loser. Mm-hmm. I just wish I would have heard you say exactly what you just said, because it took me till about 37 to finally honor that part in myself. And so, yeah, just the brilliance of what you just said. I need to go back and rewind and listen to that. That just needs to be like on repeat, because we are the only people that can actually advocate for ourselves in most instances. And you just having that awareness, but also just saying it to any version of a person out there that needs this representation is so impactful. And I think that we kind of live in a world that's obviously, like, we're very social media driven in many ways. However, there are those little sound bites that people really grab onto, and they are palpable and they make sense and they give them that reassurance, because we are all connected as beings. We're all having a human experience. All of our emotions are valid, but our behaviors are not.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's what a lot of people don't get. Is that they're quick to say, well, I act like this because of this, rather than saying, I shouldn't act like that.
Yeah,
I can acknowledge that what I went through sucked, but that doesn't mean that I get to treat people like crap.
Absolutely. You have like a conscious love with yourself. Like, oh, I just got triggered, but I need a second, and I'm going to come back to the drawing table about it, because it's my reactive behavior that I get to control. And not every instance is this, but because of the privilege that we do have in this instance of having some of that free will for ourselves, is really brilliant. And I needed to hear that today. So thank you, honey.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah.
So I just want to give some honor to what it is that you do here really quick. Obviously, my voice is on the mic with Megan today at Denver Community Media. Would not be possible without the programs that they have in order. There's so much to learn here, and they will guide you. What is the best place that they could go to look for resources if they wanted to come in and start a podcast journey?
I say come in.
Beautiful.
I don't want to... Of course, you can go to the website. I don't want to direct people to the website. I want them to come in and meet us, see what we do here.
Absolutely.
See this podcast room.
It's so
see
dope.
People producing. Yeah. Our door's open, so people can walk in right now.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I would just say, come in, meet us, get a tour. Everyone here is very friendly and ready to help.
I love that. And this is very true. And I'm a firm believer in coming into the brick and mortar spaces, because those are becoming like so far few between that you can actually like be in person with a lot of things half the time. So if you are like me and you need to be stimulated by seeing it for what it is, remind me of our address again here, because I just have memory that leads me here.
We are at 2101 Arapahoe Street.
Bomb diggity, y'all. So if you want to come in and have conversations like this, be under some beautiful guidance, or you just need to sit in the ethereal essence that is someone that is here to help, here to learn with you, and all of that, you need to just hop in here. So yeah, that's kind of what I got. I just want to say thank you so much for your time today, for, opening up. I don't want to say like vulnerable. I don't want to overuse that word, but just for your earnest energy speaking with me today. I don't take that lightly, and I just feel very honored that you sat here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I don't feel vulnerable, which is weird. It just feels comfortable. I've never talked about this stuff openly with anyone other than maybe my sisters. So
this is beautiful, friend.
It's definitely a safe space.
It is, see? But it starts with how y'all put it into play. You're the co-creator in that, so thank you. Yeah. So with that all being said, y'all, again, if this resonates, awesome. Keep listening, or send it to somebody that maybe needs this representation. I am not here to yuck anyone's yum on their healing journey, just simply to advocate for the being that I am continuing to become. It's been amazing sitting with Megan in the chair today, and I just want to remind you all to continue creating earnestly in love. Talk soon.